are so welcome to Music Unveiled, our guided listening series that we're rotating here through the libraries. We're delighted to be back here in Ballybane for our second visit. Today we'll be hearing from Dr. Aidan Thomson, who will be guiding us through some Haydn, and later we'll be joined via Zoom by Sarah O'Halloran, who's in Washington in America. Just a quick thank you to the libraries for hosting us and to our partners, the Galway City Council Arts Office, who makes this series possible through their Cultural Partnership Scheme, and also the Music Department in the University of Galway, who lend us Dr. Aidan Thomson every now and again for these sessions. Okay, I hope you really enjoy and get loads out of it. Thank you so much for coming.
Okay, well, morning everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I am mic'd up, but if not, I will shout. We're going to be talking today about a string quartet by Joseph Haydn called the Sunrise Quartet, and I'll be playing with the idea of sunrise a little bit as we talk through the different parts of this piece. Just a little bit about the background to Haydn's quartets. Haydn, a string quartet, as you're probably aware, looking at these fine performers here, is something that consists of two violins, a viola and a cello. And it's a style of music that developed in the second half of the 18th century. It became perhaps the standard form of what we call chamber music, that is to say, music that is performed without a conductor, just by the players themselves. And Haydn is one of the key figures in the development of the string quartet. He sometimes is known as the father of the string quartet. And when Haydn composed string quartets, typically each quartet is made up of what we call four movements. The movement is simply a piece of music that is in a particular speed, a particular tempo, that is, in a particular style, and is made up of particular themes. And in a Haydn string quartet, there are normally four such movements. A first movement, which is generally quite fast. It's probably the most serious of the four movements. Then there will be a slow movement, then a dance movement of some kind, and then what we call a finale, a final movement that is generally a dance movement as well. Again, it's a fairly fast movement. So each quartet is made up of four movements. And today we're going to be listening to part of the first movement of the Sunrise Quartet. Now, when Haydn published quartets, because the way in those days that you got quartets played more widely, of course, is to write them out and send them to a publisher, and musicians would buy them and then play them. We're obviously dealing in an age before sound recording. Haydn would typically publish 6 quartets at a time. So 6 quartets, each of them made up of 4 movements. And the quartet we're listening to today is one of his later works. It's from what we call his Opus 76. Opus simply means the particular publication. So this is Haydn's 76th publication of printed music. And this is the 4th quartet within that. The quartet was composed in 1797, 1798. Haydn was born in 1732, so he was in his 60s by this time. He's getting towards the end of his career. He's now working as a freelance composer rather than for the prince in Hungary that he'd been working for 30 years beforehand. And this particular quartet is dedicated to a Count Joseph Georg von Erdődy, who was a Hungarian nobleman, someone who was based in Vienna, where Haydn was living, and someone, frankly, who would have been supporting him financially, or whom he was hoping would support him financially. Part of the economics in those days was that if you wanted to get something performed and something written, you needed to get someone with money to help pay you to do that, and that's what Erdődy did. And he was a musician himself, an amateur musician, and supported music more generally. And what I'm going to be talking to today in this quartet, the first movement of the quartet, is 3 things: the phrasing, how musical phrases work in music of this time, what I'm going to call topics, and I'll explain more about what I mean by topics later on, and then how these 2 things fit into the form of the movement. But before we do that, I want you to listen to the first part of the movement. first movements of quartets generally have three broad sections to them. The first of them is called the exposition, the second is called the development, and the third is called the recapitulation. And the exposition is where we hear the main themes of the movement for the first time. And there's really three main themes in this movement. What follows it is a development, where those themes are developed. Haydn takes them and transposes them to different keys and plays them upside down and pulls them through the ringer, basically. And then the recapitulation is going back to the original themes, the themes that we heard in the exposition once again, but with a few variations to it. And I'll explain more about those later on. But for now, I just want you to think of the exposition as being the first part of the movement where we are going to hear the main themes. And there's, as I say, three main themes in particular. So I want you to listen to this, and I want you to listen particularly to how Haydn might be evoking the idea of sunrise. And if it's been a while since you've seen the sun, which I appreciate it might be, here's a picture of a sunrise just to remind you of what it can be like when we don't have any clouds. So over to you, chaps. Okay, thank you. Now, as I say, this is the first part, the exposition of the first movement of the Sunrise Quartet. That opening gives a sense of kind of pre-dawn calmness. And these are things that we're going to perhaps deal with when it comes to the topics section. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about phrasing, because this plays a part in it as well. And phrasing is one of these things that can be quite superficially easy to hear in music. Anyone who's played any music will probably be aware that you have a sign like this, a kind of big arched line that means phrasing. Everything is in one phrase. But phrases more generally in music theory, and forgive me if I go into a little bit of music theory speak just for a second, has got a more specific meaning. A phrase is basically a complete melody. So every time you hear a complete melody in a piece by Haydn, we can say it is a phrase. And it ends with what we call a cadence, a point where the music seems to come to a stop based on a particular chord progression. And I'm not going to go into details about the chord progression, but they're the sorts of things you should be able to hear easily enough if I play you an example. And it's typically made up of 8 bars. In other words, you can hear a pulse where if you hear the whole phrase, the whole melody in a certain way, you can divide it up into 8 sections. And the most common type of phrase, and I really am getting into music theory speak now, the most common type of phrase in Haydn's music and music of Haydn's period is probably what we call the sentence. And a sentence is a type of phrase that has got a very specific structure to it. It starts off with a bit of melody, what we call the presentation, and the presentation is normally made up of an initial statement and then a slight repetition of it. And that's the first half of the sentence. Then the melody is continued, usually broken up a little bit, and then we have a cadence to bring it to an end. Now, what does this mean? What does it sound like? Let's listen to an example. This is from a Mozart piano sonata of a sentence. And I'm just going to play this because it's... So that's the melody. Dum ba diddle 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 dum ba dum bum bum ba diddle 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 dum ba ba bum 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 ba ba da dum. That's the phrase, and that's a sentence phrase. Now, what it's made up of is an opening melody that goes dum ba 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 bum ba ba ba. That's our initial statement. Then we have a varied repetition of it. Bum 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 ba 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 bum ba ba bum. Then a continuation, slightly different harmony. Bum 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 bum. And then a cadence that brings the phrase to an end. Da 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 dum. And that's the end of the melody. And that's a typical 8-bar sentence. It's got a clear start, it's got a repetition, it's got a development, and it's brought to a conclusion. So the reason I'm mentioning it is just to say that length, that's the typical length of a phrase. You're not going to get phrases, particularly with smaller scale music like piano sonatas and the like. You're not going to get phrases that tend to be a lot longer. However, I want you now to listen to the primary theme, the first theme of the Sunrise Quartet. Now, this is a theme. This is all one phrase. And I want just to start off, actually, could you play the whole of bars 1 to 22, and then we'll play it again and break it down. So, bars 1 to 22. Okay, thank you very much. So that's a whole phrase. That is just as much one phrase as the little piano melody that I was humming. And I'm going to break it down now, because remember the way this phrase works, we start off with a statement and then a varied repetition. So perhaps we can just play the statement, which is bars 1 to 6. So this is the first bit of that phrase. Okay, so that's the equivalent of dum bam ba 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 bam ba da dum. Already, I think you can hear we're talking something on a much different scale. So, what the violin has done here is to ask a question. Dum Ba da 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 dum dum dum. Question mark. Now let's hear the answer to that question, which is the repetition of that opening statement. Okay, so that's the second bit of the phrase, the very repetition. Now, let's have the continuation. And how does the continuation work? Well, this is the point where the viola takes over what the violin is doing. So just listen to the next 4 bars and listen particularly to Andrea playing the viola here. Okay, so what Haydn is doing is he's taking the same rhythm, da, 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 but he's now passed it from one instrument to another. But we're not at the end of the phrase yet. We haven't got that sense of having arrived somewhere. And that's where we have to have our final section, our cadential section. And the violin takes over from the viola once again to end the phrase. So perhaps we can just go from bar 17, is that okay? And go up to 22. And that's the cadence. That's you hear how there's a sense of finality, that we've actually arrived somewhere. So that's our opening phrase. Now, what may well have struck you listening to it, certainly struck me listening to it, is just how much bigger this phrase is than the piano example I gave earlier. It's a much more expansive phrase. Haydn is taking things that should normally take maybe 2 or 3 seconds to play and expanding them out maybe over 8, 9, 10 seconds. So that whole first phrase lasts the best part of a minute. And this sense of expansiveness, to me, it's like looking at a horizon. You know, you're seeing the horizon, you're seeing the sun emerge, and you've suddenly got this sense of space. And that I think, is what is remarkable about this. And the reason I'm talking about this in technical terms is to say Haydn is doing nothing different musically in terms of how he structures a phrase from what Mozart is doing that piano sonata. But he's doing it in a way that just makes the whole thing much bigger scale, because every bit of the phrase has been expanded like a piece of elastic. Can we hear the whole phrase once again, just to illustrate it? What's interesting about this piece is that Haydn has this sense of expansiveness not only once at the beginning, but he has it later on when we get to the secondary theme as well. And perhaps, Oisin, if you can give the next 2 or 3 as well, and another one. Now this theme is structured exactly the same way, but with different instruments this time. This is from bar 36 to bar 50. It's the same type of phrase. We start off once again with the presentation of the theme, a statement on the cello, and again, the cello asks a question, and then we have the very repetition, and again, the cello answers the question. Perhaps we could just do that from bar 36 to 44. And you may notice that the rhythm of this is exactly the same as the rhythm of the first theme. 36. question. And this is the answer. Okay? And then we have a continuation, and this time all the parts are playing the same rhythm together. Bam, 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 bam. And then eventually we have another cadence that brings the phrase to a close. So could we do 44 to 50, please? This is the continuation. This is the cadence. And again, there's a sense that the phrase has come to an end. So it's got a lot in common with what we heard in the opening. It's slightly less expansive, it's slightly less long, but we still have that sense of space at the start of the theme when Adrian is playing cello. And it's very definitely based on the same musical material, the same rhythms as we had with the first theme. So just keep thinking when you're listening to this piece, just think of this sense of expansiveness. And it's Haydn managing to take a phrase and just pull it out a little bit further than he would normally be. So that's a little bit about phrasing. I want now to turn to a thing called topics. Now, what is a topic? A topic is a distinctive musical style within a piece. And the best way of describing it, I suppose, is by thinking of a song like Bohemian Rhapsody. I'm sure you all know Bohemian Rhapsody. And you'll be aware that in Bohemian Rhapsody, there's lots of different types of music that take place. There's rock-style singing, there's ballad-style singing, there's choral-style singing at the very, very beginning. There's a kind of operatic chorus in the middle of it, and there's obviously a big guitar solo. So these are 5 different styles that you would get within the one song. And this is what we, in music theory terms, we call a topic. And in the 18th century, there are a lot of different types of topic, many of them based on dances, many of them based on things like marches or particular styles of singing that you might have in the opera or in church music or things like that, that can all be used as recognizable styles in the middle of a piece. So the ones here, marches, different types of dance, different types of vocal style. And this particular piece, this particular part of the movement has got 3 different topics in it. The point about topics, though, is that you can recognize the more general style without it being specific to one piece. To go back to the Bohemian Rhapsody discussion again, I can recognize that something sounds like choral music, even though we can say that the choral music at the beginning of Bohemian Rhapsody is like choral music that you might hear in a choir singing barbershop, or a choir singing a spiritual, or a choir singing church music. At the end of the day, it's all choral music. We can recognize a ballad style of singing as opposed to a rock style of singing, because we hear ballads in other songs, we hear rock singing in other songs. And it's the same with musical topics in string quartets as well. And as I say, it's a particular feature of music in Haydn's era. A lot of the time, Haydn will take different topics that are recognizable and bounce the 2 or 3 of them off each other. So let's think about some of these topics. And I want to play yet again the opening bars of the quartet and explain to you what the topic is here. So maybe one last time, bars 1 to 22, please. Okay, that's probably enough to be going on with, just to give you the sample. Now, this is an example of a topic that is called the musette. And what is a musette? Well, a musette's a bit like a bagpipe, actually. It's a dance that is associated with a bagpipe drone. So if you can imagine a bagpipe drone, can't do a bagpipe imitation, probably just as well. With lots of long notes in the harmony, long held notes in the harmony, and people dancing to that. And that's what we had at the beginning. If we perhaps just have the beginning without Bogdan, just listen to what the lower three parts are playing. So think of that as being like a bagpiper's drone. And this is a style. The musette is a country dance. This is a style is meant to evoke the countryside. This is why I have a picture here of the countryside, a very idealized picture of the countryside. It's something that conjures up a sort of pastoral atmosphere, which of course is appropriate if we're talking about sunrises and sunrises in the countryside. So that's what we have for our first theme. And of course, it's what we also have with our second theme as well. It also starts off with a drone. You've already heard that as well, so we needn't play it again. But this time the drone is from the upper three parts, and it's the cello that has the main melody. So that's the musette. That's our first, indeed our second theme as well. Now, let's move on to another topic. And I want you to listen to what we call the transition theme. This is bar 23. So we can perhaps play from bar 23 up to maybe bar wherever that theme comes to an end, 35 or something like that, isn't it? And it's here that Bogdan and Ingrid have the experience of their arms going to the gym, basically. Now, what's different about this style? Should be fairly obvious what's different about it. Anyone want to tell me? Faster. It is much faster. And it's actually quite difficult faster as well. And this is what we call the brilliant style, partly because it was brilliantly played, thank you. But brilliant in this sense is also meant to mean a sense of brilliance, a sense of virtuosity. This is why I have a picture of Janine Jansen, the international violinist, playing in a concert, and clearly you can actually see from the blur here that she's probably playing quite fast. This is fast music, it's rapid music, it's virtuosic music. The brilliant style is also characterized by a lot of regularity. Fast, regular notes being played, almost clockwork-like. So what's it like? Well, it could be like an opera aria, fast singer singing virtuosically. It can be like an instrumentalist playing really fast as well. There's also places, you may have heard it, where the music was going bum, bum, ba, bum, bum, bum as well. Bit of march coming in as well. That's another topic that comes in. So we've got the brilliant style, we've got the march style as well. And this topic, this brilliant style, comes back again after Adrian has had his solo for the second theme. When we've gone back to the musette, the da 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 da. After that, at bar 50, we return to the brilliant style once again. So maybe we could have a bit more brilliant style, please, at bar 50 to bar 60. This time it's Adrian and then Andrea who get the fast stuff to do, and then everyone kind of joins in as well. So this is kind of interesting. We've had a musette to start with. We've had brilliant style. Then we've had more musette. Then we've had more brilliant style. And then what do we get after that? Well, let's just go from bar 60 where we stopped, and we get a third topic as well. Okay, and you're probably thinking, what does this style have to do with a chap wearing a nightcap? This is what we call the buffa style. Now, buffa, or opera buffa style, opera buffa is comic opera of the period. And comic opera of the period is often characterized by singing that involves repetitive rhythms, usually quite fast, and in a way that, because it's fast and repetitive, is also quite funny. Hence the picture here. The texture is often quite light, and if we just listen again to bar 60, you'll hear that the texture here is quite light. We've got repetitive rhythms, let's have a listen to it. Yeah, you hear we've got a light texture, we've got repetitive rhythms, sometimes on the beat, sometimes off the beat, and you could imagine someone going la ba 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 bum bum ba ba da dum la ba 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 boop 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 boom la da 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 la da da dum. You know, this is comic opera style singing. So this is our buffa style for the final theme, the closing theme of the exposition. Now, let's just consider what these different characters are like. The musette for our first and second theme. Long notes, drone-like harmony, and the melody above it almost feels like an improvisation. Dum, da, 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 da. So it's almost as if the performer is making it up. They're not, of course. It's quite dreamy. I think we can say it's quite dreamy. There's a sense that we're still in a dream, that dawn is about to break, we're about to get the sunrise. We might even go so far as to say it's idealized. It's an image of the countryside at its most beautiful, possibly even nostalgic, a sense of an idealized countryside that we're never going to recapture, a moment in the past, something incredibly beautiful and natural, but not recoverable. Not quite of this world. Now, that's the musette. The contrast to that is the fast, brilliant style. It's rapid, it's regular, it's lively, it's of the real world. It's the opposite of the musette in many ways. It's because it's regular and because it's louder and it's a bit more, it's more of a call to order, you might say. So you've got the kind of idealized on the one hand, you've got the kind of the pragmatic and real world of the brilliant style on the other. And then the opera buffa style gives a bit of humour to it as well, just to ensure that the brilliant style doesn't get too serious or that we don't get too caught up in the beauties of the countryside. We want a bit of fun as well. So I mention all this because I want to finish off by talking briefly about the form of the movement. Now, this is the first movement of a sonata, first movement of a string quartet, and it's in what we call sonata form. And the sonata form is the standard first movement of instrumental music of this era, the classical era, and indeed the romantic era that follows it. So it's the standard form of instrumental music from about 1750 to 1900. And it's based on a contrast of different themes and different keys. Now, we've already heard the different themes, each of which has got its own topic. And this is the broad model of a sonata form. You will sometimes get a slow introduction to start with. We don't have one here. We then have the exposition, which is made up of the different themes. It's usually repeated in this period. Then we have the development, where the themes are expanded or developed in different ways, changes of key, contrasts, reharmonizations, things like that. And then we have the recapitulation, which is basically the same as the exposition, but everything is in the home key rather than a variety of keys. And then sometimes there's a coda as well. So a slightly more detailed model of what happens. The first section, what we heard earlier, the exposition, we hear the primary theme. The primary theme is in the home key, what we call the tonic key. There's then the transition, which is where we change from one key to another. And then we have the secondary theme and the closing theme, which will be in a different key from our opening theme. The development is in a variety of keys. And then when we get to a recapitulation, we have essentially the same themes as we had in the exposition, but this time we're all in the one key throughout. Now, I'm not too worried about the different keys for now. I'm just mentioning all this to explain to you that that's how the piece is put together. What I want you to listen to when we hear the whole exposition again are the different topics that we've heard. We started off with the musette, the slow, the gentle, the idealistic, the dreamy, the one with the kind of bagpipe-style drone accompaniment. That's our first theme, our primary theme. We then have our transition theme, where the music changes key. That's in the brilliant style, the fast style. We then have the secondary theme, back in the musette once again, and it continues latterly in the brilliant style. And then we have the closing theme in the opera buffa style. And when you listen to the whole of the movement, because Haydn is using one or other of these different themes at different points, it means you can always equate whatever is going on to one or other of these different topics. So perhaps we could just to finish, we will hear the whole of the exposition one more time. And as we come to each of the different themes and the different topics, I will point them out to you. Okay?
Exposition.
Just the exposition. So this is the primary theme, and it's the musette topic. That dream world, we're about to come out of it. This is the transition and the brilliant style. Secondary theme, and we're back to a musette again, back into that dream world. Now the brilliant style again. And now the closing style, the closing theme, is the opera buffa style. A brilliant style to finish off with, and brilliantly played. Many, many thanks.
So thank you everyone for waiting. I'm so pleased to introduce Sarah Halloran, who got up very early this morning to talk to us all the way from the States, and she's going to be bringing us through her piece Wax Wane. Enjoy.
Hi there everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Maeve mentioned that it was possible for the quartet to maybe start by playing the piece. Maybe we could hear it and then I could tell you a little bit about how it works. Thank you so much, everybody. Well, I couldn't hear perfectly, but I saw a very content-looking baby, so I'm going to assume that that was a good sign. Um, Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Sarah O'Halloran, and if you're interested, I'm originally from Tralee in County Kerry, and these days I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and I do most of my work as a composer and sound designer for theatre. I was going to tell you a whole big spiel about my background, but we're a little short on time, so I might skip it and just move directly onto this piece. So what you just heard was a piece that I wrote about 10 years ago when I was in graduate school at the University of Virginia. And it was, I think, the second piece that I had written for string quartet. So I had been interested in sort of experimental music for a long time. And when I wrote this piece, I was in sort of a transitional phase. I had been writing a lot of pieces that were highly conceptual and tended to have just one single idea that would be explored over the course of the piece. For example, I had a piece where one instrumentalist repeated a single chord with maybe like a 2-bar rhythm over and over again, while another player played a glissando from the lowest to highest note of that chord. And it took about 10 minutes. And believe it or not, it was actually quite nice. I really liked the way that the instruments fell in and out of tune with one another over the time of the piece. And as if you were to play like a straight note and a glissando at once, a glissando is a slide on an instrument, you would hear all kinds of interesting sort of beating and throbbing as the instruments come in and out of tune with one another. And that was what I liked about that. But the problem with pieces like this, for me anyway, was that although I found them very beautiful, they were also kind of impersonal. And I had learned a lot from making music that way, but I wanted to move on from that to doing things that reflected my personal taste a bit more, offered me opportunities to edit and develop my ideas. Because the thing about a single concept piece is you either do it or you don't do it. There's not really any edits. So this piece, Wax Wane, I was interested in building chords that I found interesting. So I wasn't working with like a specific kind of harmonic concept in mind. I was just sitting at a piano. I would make a chord that I thought was beautiful, and then I would follow it with another one that was interesting to me in some way. So compared to most music that you'll hear for a string quartet, this piece is quite slow moving. But my previous string quartet probably had 8 chords in the whole thing. So, for me at the time, this piece was incredibly busy. So it starts with just 3 of the 4 instruments playing, and their notes are very close together. If you could see them on a piano keyboard, you'd see them sort of gathered around a middle C. And I did that so that we could have a sense of expansion outwards from more or less the mid-range of the quartet towards the higher and lower ranges of the ensemble, with the first violin up at the top and the cello reaching down towards the bottom. And then after the midpoint of the piece, the ensemble starts to kind of work their way back towards the middle range of the instrument through and the closely voiced chords that we had at the start. And for me, I was kind of thinking about the way that we experience the moon in its phases from like a tiny little sliver to full and then back again to nothing or almost nothing. So maybe we could listen to our first example. I know we don't have everybody, but we can work with who we have. Oh, sorry, you're back. I'm sorry. I thought someone had to leave. So we can look at bars 1 to 12 with the violins and viola. Thank you. So at the start of the second section, I add in cello, and the range of the violin notes starts to get higher as we add those cello bass notes, and there's a sense of opening up. So if you want to play the second example. And then as we move into the third section, this texture starts to get a little bit thicker, and we start to have the violin play two notes at once, which is a technique called double stopping. Thank you. And eventually, the texture starts to get quite thick with all of the instruments playing. We can listen to example 4. So this is one of those pieces that is kind of deceptively simple, in the sense that people are not having to play very, very fast. They're not having to play complicated rhythms, but they are having to play chords that can be a bit difficult to reach, a bit difficult to tune, but I'm sure this quartet is well able for it. And then if you look closely while we play the next example, you'll be able to see that sometimes the players are holding one note while the chord changes, and they are playing a second note as they continue. Thank you. And maybe I'll leave it there so that we have time for the Q&A.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have one question.
Oh, go first. Right.
Why did you want us to play everything muted? Can I ask you?
And for the audience, yeah.
You know, I looked at the score and I asked myself that very question.
I have one answer, but I want your answer.
Well, I think at the time, and probably still now, I was really interested in music that kind of draws you to lean in, and I like a sense of intimacy in this kind of music. But because it is 10 years ago, that is one of the aspects of the piece that I honestly don't remember why.
But it brings a special color anyway, yeah, to the sound.
Definitely.
So
Yeah, I like it, me personally. Sarah, may I ask you the name of your piece? Wax slash wane. What does it mean?
Well, I was thinking of, like, I love those sort of processes where things kind of build up and then like fade back away. And so, the cycle of the moon is sort of what I was thinking about in regard to this piece. I liked that kind of intimate, dark, nocturnal feel that it sort of has. So that felt like a good name for me.
Can I ask what was your answer?
Because at times we play double stops and we have so many notes at once. I think the mute brings a little bit more clarity. I think if it's not muted, it's going to be just loud and not clear enough to me.
I bet that's why I did it.
Sarah, I just have another question. I was wondering maybe
but do you know the answer? Yeah.
for the whole piece, we may use the mute for some sections and mute it off at the more intense passages.
I think that sounds great.
Cool.
I trust you all to make a really good decision about that.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us so early.
Thanks for having me.
We really appreciate it. It was so fascinating to hear about your piece, and we can't wait to hear it live on Tuesday. We'll try and get a recording for you. If we can, we'll do our best.
That would be lovely. I'd love to hear how it goes.
Great.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
And thanks again to all of you for coming, and a huge thank you to ConTempo Quartet, who bring the music alive for us in each of these sessions. Have a great day. Thanks.